Alright, so now we're on to art direction. I think with this generation that these are the type of ads that are most memorable and get a lot of the most attention because we're such a visually driven society now. Um, I came from an art directing background. This is sort of where visually my passion and my expertise lie. And the thing with art direction is you have to remember it's about showing us a story. So here you have this ad for Lego. Simple headline: creativity forgives everything. Um, they don't show forgiveness being happened. They show what it needs to be forgiven. And it's two young boys playing with Lego. And it's a great example of the show me, don't tell me. Well, the headline invites you in. Creativity forgives everything. Well, what are you talking about? What needs forgiveness? And then, boom, you see this visual here of these two boys who played with Legos, and they're using the freezer as sort of a prop. And you can imagine what kind of havoc that would wreak on a freezer. But the idea is they're using the creativity. They're playing not in front of a TV or with video games, but doing something unique. So I do really have a passion for art direction, and I think it's a great and effective way to communicate your brand in your ad. The biggest difference, though, that people need to understand is there's a difference between art directors and designers. Typically, designers are going to be a completely different job. They're a little bit lower on the totem pole in terms of most organizations. I started out as a designer, then a multimedia designer, and eventually I got to move up to being involved in the strategy and the concept and taking on kind of a role of an art director. So you'll see that the biggest difference here is designers and art directors are not the same, and don't confuse this. If you're applying for a job, make sure you understand, are you going as an art director, a junior art director, or are you going as a designer? The designer is going to be one worried about the final product. Really, they're the ones that are responsible for the final colors and making sure that the colors are in the right process for print. They're going to make sure that the layout is functional and has proper form. They're going to make sure that the stock image, the photography, the illustration, the animations, everything is up to par. The art director, though, however, is going to influence this sort of direction. They are going to have a say. They're going to maybe give guidance of this picture needs to be a little bit warmer, or this picture needs to be a little bit colder, or there's too much space or not enough space between the subjects here, or hey, the topography style isn't really matching with what our goal is. So think of it in terms of a movie. Steven Spielberg, we all know him as a great director, and anytime you catch him behind the scenes, he's not holding the camera and he's not editing the footage. He's giving everyone around him direction. He's telling them what his vision is, and they're making it happen. And that's really what an art director is going to do. They're going to tell the designers what their direction is and what their vision is. And obviously, they're going to be the ones that are focused on the strategy. Is what we're showing going to be part of that big idea to accomplish the goal? This is where the form and the function meet. Within this, there's a couple things I want you guys to understand when you're doing with art direction. As an art director, is to understand these ideas of reductionism, exaggeration. I'm briefly going to touch on some design principles and composition in here, but mostly for our in-class portion, cover these a little more thoroughly. If this is a topic that you really like, here in the PRAD program, every once in a while we offer a visual communication course that I would strongly encourage you to take a look at. Also, within this module, at one point and through the readings, you're going to learn some basic rules, tips, and tricks for art directors. And then I'll definitely conclude this lecture with some tools that you may want to start familiarizing yourself to develop your craft. So, the first concept of the art director we understand with, we've developed our strategy, we have the idea of what we want to show. Then you want to start practicing the idea of reductionism. And you want to take everything away but the essence of the ad. Think of it in terms of this way. People pay seconds of their attention to an ad. You only have a few seconds, maybe, I think some research says it's even down to like less than a second, to get their attention and communicate something. So you want to have less is more. That's a big term that you'll hear me say throughout the rest of this quarter. Less is more. If you only allow the person to focus on one thing, they're going to get that one message that you want. So you want to try to eliminate all the other potential distractions and things that can take away from your strategy. What I like to do with technique is you block the ad into its elements. So you have your copy. Then you'll have maybe the main subject or the focus of the ad. Then you'll have other details around it, other elements of the composition, other logos, and you want to start stripping these away until the ad stops making sense. And then add that one element back that was, right before the ad stopped making sense. So, for example, here we have an ad. This was for an ad to encourage people to be safe and slow drivers. Now, they could have shown, cars speeding down the zip line. They could have shown skid marks. They could have showed lots of headlines, lots of copy, long prose explaining what it is. But they reduced all that. They took everything away, and all you see is the victim of someone who was involved in an accident from, possibly dangerous driving or reckless driving, holding up a speed limit, and she's missing an arm. That visual hierarchy that you see right in the middle gets your attention and invites you in to ask, why is she missing an arm? What is that 40 about? And then there's an inline that has been cut off and purposefully removed, but it was a simple inline and tagline that says, drive slow, and then it has the PSA's sponsor's message and logo there. Always ask, is this the best way to show the product? Do we need more, or can we do less? Let me give you another example and combine that with the next term of exaggeration. When we want to exaggerate something visually, this is your chance to really exaggerate in terms of the size, the shape, the amount, and really get creative. Use a lot of analogies and metaphors when you're trying to visually describe something. Find the one thing in part of your strike that you're trying to emphasize, and they absolutely exaggerate it to maximize the attention. So this was for your morning mood, for McDonald's campaign for their easy morning, talking about, we're there for people in the morning. They didn't have a guy who looked tired riding the train. They had someone who looked like a cactus. We understand what it's itchy and what it feels like just to be irritated, and you can imagine how cactuses aren't smoothing and comfortable. And that's all it is. There's nothing else in this ad. So it's a great example of reductionism because you don't have a lot of other people distracting you. It's a very simple, clean color palette. The hierarchy is very focused on the cactus itself. The eye line is driven immediately down to the bright yellow golden arches that immediately links the brand with this visual representation. And the exaggeration of what your morning feels like before you have breakfast and your coffee is something that we can all relate to. So I love this. It's simple, it's clean, it's exaggerated, and it shows reductionism. Also, think about your creative choices in terms of, do we want to show something using stock photos? Do we want to use illustrations? Do we want to use animations? Do we want to use it to be realistic, something that's easily representation? Or do you want it to be surreal and sort of abstract, almost imaginary or postmodernism? Identify what the most and main important thing and emphasize that. Here's an ad, and it's sort of too much of an abstract idea. I think in terms of its strategy and execution, it's not one of my favorites. But for art direction, it's a great example because here they've taken an example of how buttons speak or the buttons you push to do something. And they corresponded with the actions or the tools for, like, if you were playing a soccer game. So, like, whatever you want the move is on the right with the button combination on the left. But it's really simple. It's sort of drawn out. It's clean. There's a simple hierarchy from your eye start at the top and kind of move down. You don't have to read all of the copy to understand what's happening. But again, here you have an example of just a illustration, realistic. The most important thing here, of course, was this contrast between playing the game versus playing the game in real life. Moving on to design principles. The first thing I really want you guys to understand is typography. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time in typography in this class. Obviously, if you were to take a visual communication class, this is a module that would take up one in its own. You could spend hours and days talking about typography, as tedious and as that sounds, but think about it. Just in your Microsoft Word, you have over 140 different types of fonts and styles to choose from, and each of them communicate something differently. You're going to want, if you're going to be an art director, it's important to understand all the different fonts and the different typefaces and what those communicate. For example, if you have a very soft, calligraphy-driven type of ad, that's going to indicate sophistication. If you counter that with something that uses an army stencil, for example, it's going to communicate roughness. So really pay attention of how the form of the type looks in your ad that you're trying to use. Also, don't get too clever and too cute with them. You still want it to be readable. When we talk about layout, like I said, this is too much for this class, but I'll try to mention the high points here. The biggest thing I want you to do as an art director is focus on the visual hierarchy. Identify what the most important thing is, the second most important, and then the third most important thing that you want your people to see. And you want to arrange those on your page in a way using size and colors and shapes so that there'll be a natural flow from what they notice first to what they notice second and then notice third. So if you'll notice that the example at the top, it's a side-by-side before and after ad. This was for suicide prevention. And you have a suicide note on the left. The typography or the type is very handwritten, sort of sharp, pointing, foreboding almost, if you will. And then on the right, they've kind of cleaned it up. Now you'll notice that in terms of the visual hierarchy, on the left, because you have a large, solid, contrasting white surface, it gets your attention. On the right side of that page, you have certain words that have been selected out. They've moved the copy around, so this is a great example of art direction and copy working together in harmony. And you have the right side of the page. They rewrite this and makes it a positive and inspiring message. And then at the very bottom, you see the logos. Now, because the way there's not such a heavy emphasis on the center of the page, because of the weight and the lack of color contrast, your eye naturally moves down to that bottom right where they use a dark, bold print and then the bright blue colors to see and identify the logo. So here you have a natural progression from the first thing you see to the last thing you see. A couple other things with layout you want to understand is balance. So we don't want everything on one side of the page to look like it's heavy and falling off. So here you'll notice that this sort of before and after image. Look at the way that things are laid out in the room. You have a little boy jumping at the top of the page, and he's counterbalanced with the drum set at the bottom of the page. So there's a nice balance. It doesn't look like everything's going to fall off to the top or the bottom or left or the right. You also want to use contrast. Contrast in terms of its colors, and contrast in terms of not only saturation, but the black and white, or the amount of depth. So here we have a great white, solid, clean background. Because they use bright blue, the red bow, the red pants, the red sausage packet, those are all there to really give you attention. It's not just by chance that they decided to shoot this in a sort of a white, pale, soft background. They really wanted to emphasize the products in the front, the dark and bright reds and blues. So use contrast in your colors, in your elements. Also, you want to consider space and alignment. How the things are related to one another. Now, this isn't really a good example or illustration of space or alignment. This will be an example that I'll try to show more in class. But how are your subjects, the spatial relationship, if they're really close to one another or they're really far apart from one another, that communicates relationship. Think of it in terms of this. If you're at dinner and you see a couple sitting at a table, if you see them sitting far apart from one another, not talking to one another, you probably can assume that maybe they're not a couple, they're about to break up, or they're in the middle of a fight. Compare that with or contrast that with a couple that's sitting on the same side of the booth, really close to one another. It means they're probably in love or it's a first date. So just in the space of two people, you can really get a different idea of how they're communicating. Again, use the hierarchy of information. I quickly identify as the art director what you want people to notice first, second, and third, and arrange using colors, size, shape to move that around. And then lastly, you can use a grid system, which I'll explain in greater depth during our face-to-face and some one-on-ones. Alright, and lastly, I know that these online video lectures can sometimes feel like they're dragging on a little bit. I do my best to keep them less than 30 minutes, and we're right at the 32 market. And I told you there's a lot to cover here, but one of the things I do want to conclude with is make sure you guys understand the software tools are available. Here at DePaul, we have access, or you have access, to the Adobe Creative Suite. You can download these on your computer. I believe that you can either get it free for a certain amount of time, or it's only $10 for students. So definitely look at this. What I recommend being proficient in using is your Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, and Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Flash is more for web design. Adobe Dreamweaver is going to be a lot for web design. There are some other great tools such as After Effects, which is great for multimedia design and sort of animation. Adobe Premiere is great for video animation. But you want to get proficient. If you go online, you can get books, tutorials. A lot of this can be taught yourself. Also, DePaul will be offering a design applications class. That'll be part of the curriculum in the coming quarters. I encourage you to take this as soon as you can. It'll give you a nice introduction on how to use Photoshop and how to use Illustrator. This will give you if you're an art director, it's important that you have some proficient knowledge so you can communicate your ideas. And also, as a beginning or young advertising person aspiring to be in advertising, you need to know how to bring your ideas to life and how to use the tools to communicate them so you can start building your portfolio. All right, well, if you have any questions, be sure to post them to the virtual question board for Module 8. I look forward to seeing you guys in class. We'll actually start taking our top 10 ideas, narrowing them down, and they're going to start proposing for your top 5, 5 different copy, 5 different art direction drafts. And really, the purpose of this exercise is to start kind of pushing and making sure that you guys have lots to choose from, and you can kind of combine these to have the strongest, most creative, most strategically driven message.